Why did this ruthless Samuel Woodward stab 19-year-old Blaze Bernstein 28 times? Was Samuel Woodward's cruelty a result of his involvement with the neo-Nazi terrorist group Atomwaffen Division?
The Ivy League student Blaze Bernstein, who was murdered.
The story of Blaze's unexplained disappearance and was heartbroken. As a mother of two boys, I could not begin to imagine the pain that the Bernstein family is going through.
What began as a mysterious disappearance would end in a horrifying investigation into a twisted man's online profile. But the more investigators looked into this unexpected connection, the more they realized that not everything was quite as it seemed. Today, we're looking into the twisted online world of Samuel Woodward and the red flags he left behind, filled with hate, lust, violence, and secrets. This guy was a cry away from his victim, Blaze. And Samuel, well, he left behind scores of hateful content all over the internet, and so when the authorities finally found his online profiles, he basically wrote the prosecution story all by himself, therefore leaving this story quite predictable, but also incredibly shocking. This is the case of Blaze Bernstein. It was late in the evening of January the 3rd, 2018, that 19-year-old Blaze Bernstein was officially reported as missing by his parents, all who lived in Lake Forest of California. You see, although Blade had recently moved away to Pennsylvania to study at university, he had come back for the holiday season. However, the festive period had now finally come to an end, and so with Christmas and New Year now finally over, Blade was looking to return to Pennsylvania within the next few days. To set the scene here, Lake Forest is only several miles away from the coast, and in general is a very beautiful place to be. And of course, with this being California, it is normally drenched in sun. Now, in general, this area is a very happy place to live. However, when he suddenly vanished in January, quite understandably, his parents were not happy at all. Born on April the 27th, 1998, to his father, Gideon Bernstein, and his mother, Jean Pepper, Blaze was part of a very loving family of 5. He grew up in a happy home and was encouraged by his parents to follow his dreams. To add to this, Blaze had a very good education, attending Orange County School of the Arts before then studying at the University of Pennsylvania, where he made many new friends and mentors. Now, Blaze was an exceptionally friendly young man. He was bright, expressive, creative, Jewish, and openly gay. So, let's cast ourselves back to the morning of January the 3rd, 2018. It was on that morning that Blaze was set to meet his mother in town for a dental appointment, only he would never show up. However, when she tried to call her son's mobile phone, well, that went straight through to voicemail. In response, she then called his father, only he too had some even more concerning news. It was during that phone call that the two parents realized that neither of them had heard from him since the evening prior. And so when did he vanish? Was it a mere hour ago or the better half of a day? Jean rushed home to check his bedroom, but only to find it was empty, and despite his wallet, retainer, glasses, and keys all remaining, her son was nowhere to be found. What is odd is that Blaze had messaged his mom for most of the day before making plans to meet her in town. And so with him now suddenly gone, well, this was a very worrying situation. In response, Jean called the police to file a missing persons report, while Gideon called his friends to see if they had seen him. They would also try to check online because, the Bernsteins were not ignorant of the internet. They knew that there was a high possibility that something could be found on his social media accounts. And so with that in mind, they made the difficult decision to invade his privacy and look on his laptop. Jumping onto it, they tried to log into his various social media accounts, and that is when they eventually managed to gain access to his Snapchat, which, of course, is a messaging app with the option for private messages to self-destruct. And it was there, while on his Snapchat, that they came across one contact in particular, that being a young man named Samuel Woodward. Now, Gideon and Jean had never heard of this name before, and he wasn't a friend that they knew about, but what they did know is that he had sent Sam his home address the night prior, and that the rest of the conversation seemed to be long gone due to privacy settings. This was looking rather suspicious, and Gideon, well, he wanted to tackle this mystery head on. In response, he sent one message to Sam, simply saying, "Please pick up." That is when he dialed Sam's mobile phone number, all while Jean recorded the call in the background. The word hello weakly spoke out on the other end of the line. Gideon responded with, "Hey, I have just cracked into my son's Snapchat account, and I saw that you had been trying to find him, so you're the first real clue to the puzzle here." Sam replied with, "I picked him up at 11. He then described how he had driven the two of them to the nearby BGO park before then parking up. Gideon asked, "Okay, and then did he get out of the car, or what happened?" According to Sam, Blaze had plans to meet another friend here, and so he had spontaneously driven his friend to the park. The two of them then allegedly got out of the car for a brief moment before Blaze then walked down a path and vanished into the darkness. Gideon noticed that Sam seemed quite panicked over the phone. He also explained that their encounter was more of a spur-of-the-moment kind of thing. Apparently the two were friends while attending OCSA and hadn't been in contact for a while. In response, Gideon then asked if this was the best number to reach him in the future. Sam weakly replied with, "Yes sir, it is. I want to find Blaze as much as you do." Now, this entire situation was already concerning, but the way that Sam acted on the phone call was even stranger, and so no surprise. Blaze's parents immediately handed over that recording to officers. However, they were not quite finished with their own investigations. With police formalities often taking far longer than expected, they decided to reach out to their son's friends to see what they thought about Sam. And their response was not good. For example, one friend was thoroughly surprised that the two had even considered hanging out. Apparently, Sam was crazy, and not the good kind either. He was actually very dangerous and the polar opposite of Blaze. In fact, another friend was quite blunt about the entire situation. He claimed that there would only be two reasons why Sam would ever want to meet up with Blaze. The first one would be to secretly hook up with them, and the second would be murder. Now, of course, this was very crucial information for the officers and sadly immensely worrying for his parents. And so, with him now officially declared as missing, search operations to find him began immediately. One of the local rabbis named Arnold Rackless would coordinate the search from the university synagogue, a place where Blaze was not just an active member, but also seen as a role model. The local community would print thousands of flyers to help spread the word about his disappearance. And although detectives did have a lead in Sam Wood, it was unfortunately hardly concrete at this moment in time. There was very little evidence, and not only was it entirely circumstantial, but it was not enough to warrant an arrest. Moving forward, the search for Blaze was an ongoing slog. From early mornings right the way through to dark nights, search parties would work through California's countryside all day and sometimes long after sunset. But as the days approached the 1-week mark, the community became increasingly frustrated with the lack of progress made by the police. With it being winter in January, the sun had also vanished from California's skies. The heavy rain reflected their dampened spirits as the heavens opened up above hundreds of searchers. However, it would be that rain that was the very thing which led this case to a breakthrough. In light of his disappearance, that park where Blaze had vanished from had become a stomping ground. Many search parties began from this very spot, usually with the park as a focal point of interest, but the newly found rain had changed the earth around the park, and underneath this wetted soil emerged a devastating clue. On January the 10th, 2018, only 1 week after his last known contact with family, Blaze Bernstein's body was found under a mound of hand-compacted dirt, all of which was hidden underneath a large tree branch and in the undergrowth of the park. If not for the rain, then his body may never have been uncovered. Died after an investigation into his body, it appeared that he had been viciously stabbed a total of 28 times, indicating that whoever had murdered him had done so with an explosive amount of hate. The scene was contained as soon as the discovery was made, with the DNA samples being recovered not only from his body, but the surrounding area too. However, as you can probably imagine, before those samples could even be analyzed, detectives had one person firmly in their spotlight, that it being his so-called friend, Samuel Woodward. The gruesome discovery gave detectives enough of a reason to obtain a search warrant, not only to Sam's family home, but also the car he drove on the night of Blazer's disappearance. However, before they would hand this warrant over, they had one other task to do first. It was in the middle of the day and in broad daylight that police officers who were wearing plain clothes at the time waited for Sam to leave his property. Eventually, he left the house to then get into his vehicle, and the very moment that he did, officers arrested him on suspicion of murder. The next step in their process was to obtain DNA evidence from that vehicle, and although it would take a while to come back, the results were surprising. However, it would be what they would discover inside the property that would shock them even further. After searching the house, they would eventually find a knife which appeared to be stained in blood, and after obtaining a swab from that knife, they discovered that the DNA seemed to match that of Blaze Bernstein. And now all that was left to do was for detectives to dive into Samuel's online wild. And let me tell you folks, you'll better buckle up for this one, because this guy, he is seriously sick and depraved. However, before we take a look at his online personality, let's take a brief look at Samuel's history. Born in the year 1998 to his parents, Mel and Blake, Samuel is the second of two sons after his older brother Clay. But unlike his brother, Sam is very different to him. Described as timid, closed off, and shy, he was a troubled kid in his own peculiar way. The troubling signs did seem to start early when, at the young age of 4, he intensely despised how t-shirts felt on his neck. He would take forever tying his shoes, struggled to fit in while at school, and would often fight with all of the other children in class. By 3rd grade, he was basically a sailor because none of his sentences could be finished without swearing. By the age of 10, his isolation had become far more distinctive. Around this time, he began to fixate on things ranging from sharks and spiders to cars and airplanes to World War II. More specifically, he seemed to love the Nazi Party and became infatuated with their ideas. Unrelated, but Sam was eventually diagnosed with autism. From 7th grade, he enrolled at the Orange County School of the Arts, where, as you can imagine, people from all walks of life were finding their own feet and their identities, but this became a big problem for Sam. Due to his conservative upbringing and his interest in Nazi ideologies, he developed a largely judgmental view of minorities. In fact, he struggled with it so much that he was pulled out of school after the first year. This isolation would follow him throughout his teenage years, finishing his junior and senior years at Corona Del Mar High School, before then enrolling at the California State University Channel Islands. To absolutely no one's surprise, much like his younger years, he would not prosper at all in his university education. His fellow peers would describe him as quiet, awkward, and unsociable. Withdrawn to himself, he made no effort to mingle with any other students, instead sitting quietly in class while doodling in his notebooks. Taking a brief look at his notebooks, his doodles were primarily a scribbled mess of his inner thoughts and feelings. Most of his drawings were either military or violent images. Because of the kind of person that he is, classmates called him racist, homophobic, and sexist, and since, quite understandably, nobody wanted him around, all he could do was find his own crowd online. But Sam would find refuge in a Russian-owned meme-sharing website named iFunny, and although this website was intended for memes and nothing more, it would eventually become somewhat hijacked by extremists around the year 2010, and once again, the main reason behind this was the lack of moderation. While here, Sam found many like-minded people who encouraged his extreme ideologies and views rather than shunning them. He would become obsessed with the Atomwaffen Division, also known as the National Socialist Resistance Front. And by the way, these guys are so extremist that multiple countries have designated them as an online terrorist group. Now, his family had no idea he was on this website or what he was up to, and this is why content moderation can be so important here. As through their ignorance, Sam became radicalized. Plenty of images of him can be found online, for example, this one of him wearing an Atomwaffen mask, a skull-patterned face covering often worn by its members. After Sam turned 18 years old, he had more access to his own freedom. Stepping away from the computer, he once traveled to Colorado to meet James Mason, who at the time was a neo-Nazi group leader. To add to that, he would then eventually attend a camp which was run by the very same group. While at this camp, they focused on the downfall of society while also enforcing their beliefs. Shortly after leaving the camp, Samuel returned to his family home where he felt downtrodden and frustrated with his loneliness. It was shortly after that he decided to sign up to the popular dating app Tinder. Now, I'm sure I don't need to explain to you how Tinder works, but one of the necessary steps that you have to take is to provide your gender preference in order to get matched partners. And strangely enough, Samuel, who quite clearly was an avid sexist and homophobic, would then go on to select that he was seeking not only women, but men as well. Now, as soon as you hit that button, you'll be connected with other people in your area and well, let's just say that this surprise revelation would spread rather quickly around town. This would be how Blaze would eventually connect with Samuel. And so in the latter months of 2017, the two started chatting before then exploring the idea of meeting for some fun. Simultaneously, Sam would persevere with his hatred online. Blaze would be the first one to start the conversation, reaching out to say, "I think you're hot." But the real surprise was from Samuel, to which he then replied with, "You're not too bad looking yourself, Blaze." After that, infrequent messages were exchanged between the two of them. However, due to their physical distance while at university, no physical in-person meeting was ever arranged. That would be until the holiday season and shortly after the new year. Being direct with you here, but we don't actually know if Samuel was genuinely interested in Blaze or if it was a planned attack. There is a chance that he was simply looking for a target, or maybe he was exploring his repressed sexuality. Either way, an investigation into his computer and his online history concluded that Samuel had indulged in gay, dating, and porn sites many times over the previous months. This was both before and after coming in contact with Blaze. So my personal opinion is that he was now exploring something that he'd put off for quite some time. Anyway, Sam was on trial for murder. And not for his sexuality, but rather interestingly, he would have a lot to say about both of these things. According to him, he picked Blaze up at around 11 p.m. before then driving them to BGO Park. After that, they then chatted for a short while before sparking up a joint. I guess this was something to ease the nerves for Samuel because, after all, it was the first time he had done anything like this before. Blaze, on the other hand, who was far more confident with his sexuality, would drive most of the conversation, and according to Sam, due to the effects of weed and him not being used to it, he then began to doze off. Sam claims that by the time he came around, he noticed that not only had Blaze undone his belt buckle, but he also had his phone in his hand. As a result, he assumed that maybe Blaze had taken a picture of the two of them, which then sent him in a panic. It is worth noting here, though, that there is no evidence to suggest a photo ever being taken, and further forensic analysis would conclude that no phone activity ever seemed to occur. Either way, Sam claims that Blaze then apparently threatened to tell not only his friends but also his family about their adventure, to which he further panicked, saw red, and then snapped. He admitted to grabbing the knife and then stabbing Blaze in a fit of rage, and when all of this was said and done, he then dragged his lifeless body into the underbrush of the park. After that, Sam then returned home to fall asleep as if nothing had happened, only to wake up the next day from a phone call from Blaze's father, Gideon. Online analysis would confirm that in the following days, Sam routinely visited websites and forums that seemed to congratulate him over Blaze's murder, further suggesting that he actually relished in his death. Moving forward, the authorities unsurprisingly declared this incident to be a hate crime for various reasons. I mean, was this attack anti-Semitic or anti-homosexual? I'll let you decide. Shortly after his arrest, which was on January the 13th, the presiding judge would charge Sam not only with murder, but also with personal use of a deadly weapon. Later on that year in August, 2 additional charges would be added, those being positioned around Blaze's sexuality and his religion. At this point in time, Samuel pleaded not guilty to murder, and unfortunately, with this happening just before COVID, all appearances would be sluggish. And although his bail was initially set at $5 million, this would later be revoked, forcing Samuel to remain behind bars until after his trial. Of course, there would be plenty of questions around Samuel's mental health, and some even argued if he was even fit enough to stand trial. However, after being assessed by several psychologists, they found that he was in fact healthy enough. By the time all was said and done, and his pre-trial finally commenced, It had been 5 years since Blaze had been murdered. Of course, his family were both furious and very eager to get the trial underway. However, unfortunately, they would have to wait 1 extra year. By the time April 2024 rolled around and Sam had finally been brought to the stand, it became quite clear that time had not treated him well. He showed up in court with long, disheveled hair and gaunt, malnourished facial features. Members of the court would speak of his menacing presence, often comparing it to that of the infamous cult leader Charles Manson. And although you couldn't really see his face behind that greasy mop, his voice would often crackle weakly. Samuel spoke minimally in his trial, allowing his defense attorneys to speak for him instead. In their opening statements, his attorney admitted his client's guilt, which was a stark change from his non-guilty plea only 6 years earlier. They claimed that Sam's actions were not premeditated, nor were they motivated by homophobia or anti-Semitism. Instead, they claimed it was an unfortunate buildup of panic and repression. His defense team would also highlight the consensual messages sent between him and Blaze, and would further reveal that Sam's father, who was very homophobic, often scared his son from being openly gay. They would also discuss Sam's mental health issues, which included his diagnosis of Asperger's syndrome and obsessive-compulsive disorder, and as for the knife, well, apparently it was never meant to hurt anyone. Sam claimed that old habits die hard, and thanks to him being a Boy Scout, he was never without one. However, the prosecution would destroy all hope that Sam had. They argued that online radicalization encouraged Sam's already conservative upbringing, further nurturing him into a poisonous extremist who supported racism, homophobia, and sexism. Their evidence was quite solid too, as they would produce numerous emails sent by Sam to fellow extremists. This was alongside photos of him proudly posing with well-known self-identified extremists. But in the end, it would actually be Sam himself who sealed his own fate. When called to the stand and he was asked, "Do you remember what you were thinking when you were driving the knife down?" And after a long pause, Sam replied with, "An anger like nothing I'd ever felt in my life." He would go on to say, "I grew up in a home with my mother and father, and I love them more than I can imagine. My father thought, there is no way, not a chance people like him. Just even thinking about the look on his face if he saw or heard about something like that, if that got out somehow, I couldn't fathom that." To no one's surprise whatsoever, on July the 3rd, 2024, which was 6.5 years after the death of Blaze, Sam was finally found guilty of his murder. And it must be noted here that during his verdict, he did not seem to be remorseful whatsoever. With the jury in the election finding it to be true, the defendant, Samuel Woodward, committed hate crime first-degree murder. On November the 16th, 2024, he was then sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. While issuing the sentence, the judge said there was evidence that he planned the murder and that furthermore it was committed out of hate against sexuality. Sam was not present for his sentencing, as apparently he was too sick to attend. The judge declared this case to be a true tragedy, further saying, "You have one young man who was smart, funny, successful, and on track for a bright future. And then you have a second intelligent young man with lots of promise but struggling with his sexual identity, his mental health, and his loneliness, and never receiving psychological support that he so clearly needed, but saying that the only one who really matters here is Blaze Bernstein, found within the park where he lived his final moments." There are now hundreds of hand-painted stones in memory of him. Several communities from various walks of life all remember him for his happy, positive self. He was a bright beacon of positivity to all of those who knew him, a person who could turn the ordinary into the extraordinary. And his mother, more than anyone else, saw that spark in her son. His message of tolerance, love, and acceptance rings out through his memory, and the pile of stones have only grown over time as people are brought together through their loss. Through his death, his parents are now dedicated to spreading love and kindness in his honor. They have since created the Blaze It Forward campaign, which encourages people to perform acts of kindness in memory of their son. Samuel, on the other hand, will remain behind bars for the rest of his life until he rots. What a waste of a human life. With that said, we've reached the end of today's video, folks. Thank you so much for watching today. I really do appreciate you being here. However, before I go, I'd love to know what you think about this story. Why do you think Samuel murdered Blade? Was this an act of violence against his sexuality or his religion, or was it something else? And as always, I'll see you again very soon for another video. Until that moment arrives, though, please do remember to look after yourselves and look out for each other. Thank you so much. Goodbye.